Something is breaking, and it's happening in plain sight. For years, the United States warned the world about Russia and China. We were told they wanted to destroy America's alliances, to pull our friends away, to weaken the global order from the outside. But here is the shock. In 2026, that job is being done by the American president himself. I have studied global power for decades, and history is clear on one point. World orders do not collapse overnight. They decay slowly. Trust erodes. Rules are bent. Allies hesitate. Then one day, they stop looking to Washington. This week, America's closest partners did something extraordinary. They didn't criticize quietly. They spoke openly, together, and their message was unmistakable. This wasn't a policy dispute. It was a warning. If you care about how power actually works in the modern world, stay with me. Because what we are witnessing is not noise. It is a shift, and to understand where this leads, we must first define what is truly happening beneath the headlines. At the center of this moment is a simple question. What happens when allies no longer trust the leader of the system? For decades, the United States was not just powerful, it was predictable, it defended sovereignty, it respected borders, it anchored alliances with shared values, not personal impulses. That assumption is now under strain. The problem is not a single decision. It is a pattern, a foreign policy shaped less by strategy and more by instinct, less by institutions and more by personality. Allies are watching an America that threatens territorial integrity. That launches military operations without consensus. That treats international law as optional. And that demands loyalty without offering reassurance. This creates confusion. And confusion is dangerous in global politics. When partners cannot anticipate your actions, they prepare for distance. When values become uncertain, alliances become conditional. What we are seeing is not rebellion, it is recalibration. And to understand why this recalibration is happening now, we need to look backward at the system the United States once built and the rules that held it together. To understand the moment we are in, we need to go back to the beginning, to the foundations of the global order the U.S. helped create. After World War II, the U.S. was the architect of a new international system. It wasn't just about military power. It was about values. It was about trust. It was about upholding the rule of law. For decades, that system worked. It provided stability. It kept war in check. It allowed economies to grow. And it brought countries together under shared principles. The U.S. was the leader of this system, but it didn't act alone. It built partnerships. It encouraged multilateralism. It nurtured democratic norms. But in 2026, that vision feels like a distant memory. What happened? What happened was a shift in how the U.S. sees itself and how others see it. No longer a leader, but a disruptor. No longer a stabilizing force, but a wild card. The question is no longer if the system can survive, but if America itself can lead it forward. And that brings us to the first crisis, one that brought this shift into the open. A few weeks ago, something happened that sent shockwaves through the international community. The US president made a bold, reckless threat about Greenland. It wasn't just an offhand remark. It was a declaration, one that questioned the very sovereignty of a US ally. The leaders of France, Germany, Britain, Italy, Poland, Spain, and Denmark responded swiftly. They issued a joint declaration. They made it clear the United States could not undermine the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty. This was not a typical diplomatic disagreement. This was a statement of defiance. It was a rejection of a behavior that the world had long accepted from America. The US was no longer the unquestioned defender of global norms. It was becoming the threat to them. This moment wasn't just about one policy. It was about the unraveling of trust. a trust built over decades, a trust that's now been severely shaken, and it didn't stop there. The response was just the beginning. It was a sign of something bigger, something that's been brewing for months. But this wasn't the first crisis, and it certainly won't be the last. Just days after the Greenland controversy, another crisis emerged. This time, it was in Venezuela. The US launched a military offensive, but the world didn't stand by. Even America's allies were alarmed. At an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council, the US was criticized not by rivals, but by partners. Our closest allies in Europe condemned the action, saying it violated international law. They argued it chipped away at the very foundation of global order. This wasn't just a rebuke, it was a shift in perception. No longer could the US act without question. No longer could it claim moral high ground. These allies, countries that had stood beside the US for decades, were now openly challenging its actions. And the message was clear. The US was no longer seen as a trusted partner in maintaining global stability. It was becoming a destabilizing force. This marked the second mini-crisis in a matter of weeks. And it was a loud wake-up call for the international community. America's role in the world was no longer certain, and the world was starting to notice. As the world reacted to these crises, the impact on the people of America's allies became undeniable. This was no longer just about governments. It was about the citizens who lived under the security guarantees America once provided. And for them, the shift was personal. Germany's president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, warned of a global realignment. He pointed to a breakdown of values, a breakdown that the US, the very country that helped build the current world order, was now contributing to. For Europeans, this wasn't just policy failure. It was a loss of trust in America's leadership. And without that trust, alliances break. Across Europe, people were asking, how long can we count on the US to protect us? How long can we accept an America that shifts its commitments without warning? This wasn't just a matter of disagreeing over policy. It was a matter of security. And that feeling of insecurity was spreading. And it wasn't just Europe. From the Caribbean to East Asia, the fallout was felt everywhere. When even longtime allies start questioning whether the US is a force for good, the people feel it. This is the third mini-crisis, and it's affecting more than just governments. It's affecting the people, the citizens who once saw America as a beacon of stability. Now, they're wondering if that beacon has dimmed. As the cracks in America's alliances widen, the ripple effects are becoming undeniable. Countries that once relied on US leadership are now seeking alternatives. They're rethinking their strategies, recalibrating their policies, and strengthening ties with one another. The US is being left out of the conversations that matter most. Take the Netherlands, for example. They recently announced they were scaling back their participation in US-led counter-drug operations in the Caribbean. Why? Because they oppose the US military's deadly operations against civilian boats in the region. The UK followed suit, halting intelligence sharing with the US about those same boats. These are not isolated decisions. They are part of a larger trend. Allies are no longer just disagreeing with the US. They are actively distancing themselves. This isn't just about policy disagreements. It's about trust that's now fraying at the edges. And as that trust fades, countries that once stood with America are looking elsewhere. The geopolitical landscape is shifting, and the US is being left behind. But the question remains, what happens next? Where does this path lead? To understand that, we must look to the future. The future of America's global role is uncertain, but we can make educated guesses. Let's consider three possible scenarios. First, the best-case scenario. The US regains its position as a trusted leader. It reaffirms its commitment to global alliances, to international norms, and to stability. In this world, America reconciles with its allies, rebuilds trust, and returns to the role of global anchor. But this is not the most likely outcome. Second, a middle ground scenario. America's alliances are strained but not completely broken. The US continues to engage with the world, but its influence is reduced. Allies turn to each other more often, with the US taking a back seat. Global institutions continue to function, but they are weakened by America's absence at the table. And finally, the worst case scenario. The US becomes increasingly isolated, traditional alliance fracture. Countries that once relied on America are forced to look elsewhere for security and leadership. The global order unravels as the world turns inward, creating a more fragmented and unstable international system. This is the future we risk if the current trajectory continues, and it's one that we should take seriously. But no matter the outcome, one thing is clear: the world is changing, and America's place in it is no longer guaranteed. As we look to the future, we cannot ignore the consequences of this unraveling. What was once unthinkable is now within reach. A world where the US is no longer the center, but a peripheral player. This shift won't just impact global politics. It will affect every individual in this system. The trust that once kept us united is slipping away. And as it does, the very foundation of international order is being shaken. But here's the truth. It doesn't have to be this way. We can choose a different path, a path where we rebuild those lost alliances, a path where the US leads not through force or fear, but through respect and partnership. This is the choice we face. The stakes are high and the world is watching. The future is still unwritten, and it's up to us to decide which direction we'll take. America's role in the world is on the line, but it's not too late to turn the tide. And as we move forward, we must remember, the world may be changing, but it's up to us to shape what comes next.